This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is February 27th, 2026.
I'm Scott Lundbaum.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, the BC Conservative race is tightening up with candidates dropping out and MLNA endorsements racking up. The NDP is under fire for policy changes. The federal government might be fine with some light foreign interference. And the Conservatives got an amendment to the budget passed. So good for them. Go to patreon.com/politicos to support the show, get access to the Slack channel, and keep the conversation going. Let's start here in BC with the BC Conservative leadership race, which thankfully is not a dozen people or more anymore, as two sitting MLAs have decided they don't have the juice. Specifically, Steve Cooner and Sheldon Clare have both announced in the last few days that things aren't going their way, and they're going to step aside and look to put their support somewhere else in this race.
I'm going to be honest, I'd forgotten who Sheldon Clare was and that he was even running before this announcement came out. Kind of had to Google him a bit once the reporting started coming out that he was dropping out.
Neither of these guys were front runners.
Yeah, I mean, Cooner at least was the critic for Attorney General. So, a fairly high-profile critic role. Not that that really matters that much once you get outside Victoria, but there was at least a little more of an argument there for a modest profile.
Yeah, but it only held that role for a hot minute since the election, I believe. So, it's more than nothing, but also not too high of a public profile. For his part, Sheldon Clare said, he submitted the over 250 signatures he needed, but the party came back and said, actually, a lot of these people aren't members. It's either lapsed or they never were members, and therefore you don't get to run. He took full responsibility for that, but it's a pretty big oversight to get the wrong names on the list.
Yeah, it's not great. And yeah, every now and then, a couple of these ones get struck off for whatever reason, but a good campaign will put in a lot more than just the bare minimum in order to make sure they're protected from that, unless they can't actually get a lot more than the bare minimum, which might be a real possibility here.
Yeah. So they return to not civilian life, but just normal MLA life. And I think both are planning to make another endorsement, or at least they're going to follow the race, and we'll see. But we do have 5 MLAs who've come forward and endorsed Peter Millibar. This is Ward Starmer, Brennan Day, Gavin Dew, Keel Giddens, and Scott McInnes are all lined up behind former BC Liberal / BC United and now BC Conservative Peter Millibar.
It's quite a few of the former BC Liberals in that camp there. Makes that interesting.
Yeah, I think Millibar is trying to line himself up as like the moderate, like we can't go off into Looney Tunes far right land. We should try to keep touching grass with British Columbians in the lower mainland and across BC who aren't eager to vote One BC or for some of the more cultural politics that seem to be rampant in much of the right wing these days.
Yeah. Ward Starmer, I think, is the only one of those people that wasn't at least a BC United candidate at one point. But, yeah, him and Ian Black are kind of fighting out for that lane of the thing. Black has fewer BC Liberal endorsements, although he does have Teresa Watt and Mike DeYoung, at least going off the Wikipedia's list, and a few federal conservatives backing him. But, you're James Moore and Ed Fast types, neither of whom are, prominent culture warriors.
Millibar is the former mayor of Kamloops, which he served from 2008 until 2017, when he was elected to the BC legislature as the MLA for Kamloops, North Thompson, and later Kamloops Centre. We'll see what he brings forward as his platform and his focus. But I think it would be quite in line with the shape of where like Kevin Falcon was, but maybe with something different to make it work better this time for him. Although we never saw Kevin Falcon in a general election, so who knows?
Maybe is there any reason to believe that would have gone well?
No.
I hope he's enjoying his post-politics time as, a car storage entrepreneur?
He's still technically leader of BC United, last I checked. He's going to, have that party die with him.
Yeah, at this point, I'm surprised they haven't just gotten deregistered by Elections BC for not doing the paperwork filings, because it doesn't seem like anything's going on there. But, maybe still putting in the forms, even if nothing's actually happening.
Their website doesn't exist right now. It's just a blank page. Like, they're parking the URL. But
why? Are they trying to, offload it to a soccer team that sets up shop in BC at some point?
I mean, maybe that will pay off their debts if they could sell the URL at least.
I think you're vastly overestimating how much brand equity there is in a name like BC United.
Well, one thing that's not super united is the provincial and federal Conservatives, as the federal Tories are a little mad at the province or their provincial brethren for data theft.
Specifically one candidate who sent out a letter that was, from the BC or from the federal Conservative mailing list with the federal Conservative branding on it about a campaign event. This would be Carolyn Finley, and it went out from the Vancouver Centre Conservative EDA to their list.
Well, it's a good thing that right now the federal parties are still subject to BC privacy law, because that gives members of those parties a little bit more recourse to be mad. Although if certain tax bills pass the federal parliament, that will be undone. But in the meantime, this is not cool.
No, and the federal Conservatives are entirely right to be a little pissed off about that, because they don't want to get involved in a different party's leadership race and end up alienating some of their people. And yeah, it's just completely understandable for them to be upset over it. And, historically, lists have a way of getting spread around and shared and making their way from one campaign to another. So this is not unheard of before, but usually it's more the case that someone finds out because they get an email from a campaign they haven't signed up for, rather than apparently just hijacking a different party's EDA's mailing system with that other party's branding on it. It's just sloppy, even by the standards of the less than ideal data management of leadership campaigns.
Indeed. So good for the federal Conservatives for taking action. I think they're not the NDP, right? They don't share their lists. So the other thing going on in the right wing this week in BC is Tara Armstrong decided to do another bill at first reading stunt where she's sharing the right wing outrage that Barry Neufeld was slapped down by the BC Human Rights Tribunal, and her response is to abolish the Human Rights Code entirely. Just repeal the Human Rights Code, get rid of the commissioner, no more tribunals. You get fired for being black, you have no recourse under that idea.
A little extreme.
Yeah.
The tribunals have not been without criticism. think like 20 years ago they were also getting criticized, and usually those concerns relate to the speech aspects of the cases they take up, and some of the issues around whether or not they have the same procedural protections for defendants as cases before the courts, and a bunch of other stuff like that. But like, nobody thinks the getting fired and like clear employment discrimination shouldn't be protected.
Well,
Like,
apparently Tara Armstrong does, and so did the BC Conservative Caucus, who voted for this bill to go forward at first reading.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if they actually read what they were voting on, because...
Well, fun fact, at first reading, you don't have the text of the bill. So maybe, but like, I'm pretty sure it was well understood what it was going to say, because she did introduce it with a speech saying this bill will repeal the Human Rights Code. Hence why the NDP said we're not supporting that, as did a number of the independents. Like, I'm not going to say Starko voted for or against it. I wouldn't be surprised.
Against. I saw that covered.
Yeah, and I know Boltby voted against this bill, so it died with some ex-conservatives opposing it. But yeah, real stuff happening still on that, like, 1BC and X1BC side of the legislature.
Yeah, the BC Conservatives going for it's a bit of an own goal, though.
Yeah. Although a number of their leadership candidates they're choosing to, grandstand a bit on this tribunal ruling. But like you said, the Human Rights Act does much more than just the speech cases that are pretty controversial in most cases.
Yeah, I could understand it if they were specifically addressing the tribunal and speech-related cases. There'd be much more solid ground on that, but going wide, on the other hand, not really.
That said, the NDP, for their part, is not without criticism this week. There's a few things happening from their point of view. I want to talk about, since we're in the legislature, let's talk about that first. They have brought forward 2 bills this week, one on updates to the Civil Forfeiture Act. Neither of us have looked at that close enough or found any criticism of it, so I'm going to kind of skip past that to focus.
Doesn't even really seem to have been covered much from what we can tell, and flipping through the text of the bill, it's one of these do a bunch of technical updates to the language, which you kind of need to be familiar with the act and how it actually works to have a lot of insightful things to say about whether or not it's a good bill or not.
Yeah, might be nothing, might be a big overreach of a already somewhat controversial police power. The freedom of information stuff is similarly technical and is generating some reaction. The privacy commissioner, for his part, said, he was consulted in advance of this, and he appreciates many of the steps the government seems to be taking with this Bill 9 to improve efficiency and make things a little bit more clear. That said, Vaughn Palmer and the Freedom of Information and Privacy Protection of Privacy Association of BC are lambasting the government as, quote, keeping the public in the dark.
Well, I'm not surprised that this is getting a little more attention, if for no other reason than that journalists have been complaining about the Freedom of Information Act for forever now, particularly since the NDP brought in their last set of changes on it. My reading of this, it doesn't like significantly change things, but it doesn't move things in the more transparency direction either. A lot of it's on personal information requests, which fine. Other than the part where the government wants to be able to ask people to let them have more time to answer these, those portions seem fairly uncontroversial. It's the other parts that might be a little more questionable from the perspective of journalists and the opposition. Certainly doesn't make it easier to get information.
Yeah, one of the big things, so there's a couple like changes that have been pulled out for criticism. One is changing the duty of public bodies to get back to applicants for information without delay to without unreasonable delay, suggesting the government can decide for itself what's a reasonable delay or not.
And, listening to the critics of the current system, one would certainly be left with the impression that before now they've not been particularly concerned about delays or their reasonableness.
And there's also a portion in there that will allow the government or public bodies to disregard and throw out requests if, quote, responding to the request would unreasonably interfere with the operations of the government to BC or the public body. Which, come on. What kind of request are we talking about here? Like, this is a function of our government if your part of your government is to be transparent, then a transparency request can't impede that.
I don't know. Like, you could definitely have parts of governments working at cross purposes with each other. It's hardly an unheard of thing.
Oh, yeah.
That said, I have trouble thinking of an actual scenario where that would come into play.
Like, there's a section in that same part that says they'll reject requests that are unreasonably broad, which I guess is fair enough, because when you make an FOI request, they have a duty to help you get to what you want. And so when I've made them, usually the staff are actually, sincere about that and do good work. I never mean to demean them. It's the system that's the problem. And so they do try to help. They say, oh, your request is going to cost you like $4,000 if you put it this way. But it seems like you really just want like these 3 emails. Should we frame it that way? And it's like, yeah, actually, that would be great. And that's fine. But yeah, the transparency stuff is always tough because governments don't deserve the benefit of the doubt with these with these kinds of changes. And, I need to see them prove that they are committed to actually getting more documents out faster. And I'm not convinced anything in this bill does that. It feels like it's going to change the denominator rather than the numerator. Like, we will discard more requests, and therefore we've made the process more efficient because fewer requests are getting returned. That's not all. People are mad at them for a number of doctors' clinics are upset about changes to family doctor billing. They're arguing it could limit access to primary care, as clinics will no longer see some patients who are not on their rolls. Yeah,
specifically under the recent changes to how family doctors are getting paid. If a family doctor sees more than 30% of people that aren't enrolled on their clinic, drop-ins, that sort of thing, they would get their pay cut. Also, if the family doctor is seeing too many people and have more than 2,500 people on their patient rolls, they'll also get their pay cut. So basically, right now, the government's set up to kind of penalize people who are seeing people without family doctors if they devote too much of their practice to it, which I could kind of see that in a world where BC had an abundance of family doctors and it was real easy to get one. But, there's been some improvements, but still about 20% of British Columbians don't have a family doctor. That's 1 in 5. That's, maybe not the time when you want to be trying to penalize the doctors that do help those people out and see them.
Yeah, it's a weird issue because the article that we'll link to highlights that, there's a number of clinics that this will affect that are scrambling to try to figure out what to do before the, waiver ends at March 31st. Like, do they just stop seeing so many walk-ins? Or do they have to get these people enrolled on their lists, and that will cause administrative headaches, according to them, or take more bureaucracy? There are a number of other clinics they quote who are like, you know what, it's fine. It's our system works. We have most of our patients are enrolled, and we still see some walk-ins. Like 30% is still quite a few walk-ins for a clinic that is generally not a walk-in clinic. And weirdly, neither Doctors of BC or BC Family Doctors advocacy groups are concerned about this. BC Family Doctors just didn't reply for a request for information from the journalists, and Doctors of BC has kind of just advised doctors about these coming changes and hasn't taken a strong position that this is a problem. So it's hard for me to read how big of an issue this is. It's definitely affecting some clinics, but I can't tell if those are clinics that are just not willing to like get people signed up with a family doctor who are coming regularly, which they should be, honestly.
Yeah, although the way it's set up with there's also a cap makes me just wonder if part of it is they're going to get penalized either way on that. So it doesn't necessarily make sense, particularly because once someone is on the rolls, that's a harder issue to resolve than someone, who showed up for a walk-in appointment.
Yeah, I also have to see the changes to family doctor pay have generally, I think, been pretty well received overall, mostly because doctors are getting more money. And who doesn't like that? And it simplifies administrative headaches a little bit, I think, versus the previous purely fee-for-service model where it was like, how many people can we rush through as fast as we can to just rack up the billings? And they have, like you said, increased the number of people who have access to family doctors. I think I saw a headline saying BC is the most improved province on that metric.
It's still not a great outcome. Like being the least worst province on healthcare is not exactly something to celebrate, considering nobody's knocking it out of the park.
Yeah, most improved reminds me of the awards I would get in sports as a kid. The consolation prizes. It's not a real thing. But we'll keep tracking it. It kind of is this whole reminder of how complex medicine is in this province. Like there's doctors in this article talking about how, they're locums. Like sometimes they're spending 1 or 2 days a week at a clinic, but they also have a full-time role working out of a hospital. And sometimes they're doing 2 or 3 other things. And, the doctors I see or my family sees are often in those kind of situations where sometimes they're at BC Children's, sometimes they're a pediatrician in private practice, and sometimes they're doing something else. And you're like, I can't imagine that life, but I guess it works for them. Lets them, do lots of different things. But this model is discouraging that a little bit because the family doctors have to have a minimum number of patients on their roll. So growing pains at the very least, possibly bad incentives at the worst. One of the other programs with growing pains is our $10 a day childcare program. With the new budget, there has been some pausing and stabilization as there was a lot of talk of changing the funding model for the $10 a day centers. And a lot of centers were very concerned that they were not going to have enough money to pay their ECEs and staff. And so they were considering shutting down, which would be a net negative to the provincial program that is trying to put more kids in $10 a day. Well, now they're not. Now they're just going to keep the exact same number of kids in $10 a day daycare.
Yeah, their solution to this was just stop expanding the program altogether, which, not great if you're one of the many, many families that aren't in the $10 a day childcare program.
No, which is most of them, about 90%. Some families do receive subsidies through the affordable childcare benefit. That's means tested. That helps get them to 10 a day. But it's the centers that have, qualified for the pilot that are the golden ticket where you just pay $200 a month and it's brilliant. I've never been in that. I knew someone who got in it and loved it because that is an affordable childcare amount. Katrina Chen, the former MLA and Minister of Childcare who helped set up BC's program, is notably speaking out and is really frustrated by the government's delays. She's pointed out that we had a plan to get there in 10 years, and I get that delays happen, but it seems like they're just giving up. Or, a 3-year delay that they're talking about now might take all momentum away, and it could be an entirely different government that has no interest in doing anything more with this by the time that pause is over. And I get her frustration.
Yeah, it's a little bit like what we talked about with the whole budget last week of just spending increasingly more to kind of stay in the same spot. And it just seems like another example of that of, we're spending a lot on childcare, not expanding it at all. Just gonna pause where we are, and, it's not necessarily going to help the next generation or the, growing number of kids that need it in the province.
Yeah, and BC has brought average childcare costs down, but we're still the most expensive in the country. And this past week, Alberta dropped its budget, and the numbers are slightly different, but the story is kind of the same. They have a big deficit. They increased education and healthcare funding a bit. They didn't increase any new taxes because they said they didn't have a mandate to do that. They don't have a mandate to do a lot of other things they're doing, but whatever. And then they blamed immigrants, which was the big difference for them. Immigrants that Danielle Smith had begged the federal government for 2 years ago. But, they're in a different position. But the fiscal challenges that BC face are not unique, but that doesn't let the government off the hook, obviously, for needing to find a way to solve them.
Yeah, it's been a consistent problem kind of across Canada. As a look federally, maybe discount this last budget from the analysis because there is kind of changing track a bit on some stuff. But, you look at the last several Trudeau budgets, and a lot of those were, we're throwing increasing numbers of dollars and public servants at stuff, and it's not really actually improving things for a lot of people. So it's a fairly consistent challenge that it would be really nice if someone could get a hold of and actually solve.
Yeah, I see that Saskatchewan's predicting they will have a deficit coming out. Manitoba's budget's not coming till March 24th, which, cool. But they're expected a deficit of 1.6 billion as well. The tariffs and the trade war is definitely, I think, having an effect and shouldn't be negated. But it's still this countrywide challenge of what are we doing? And no one has come forward with a clear solution or answer. Or when they do, they kind of bring forward a bill and then it gets forgotten about. Or, we create a major projects office and then nothing. And I get some things take a long time to build.
Well,
so maybe I'm just impatient.
Major projects office might be the thing that actually points a little bit at where some of these problems are. Of we've just spent decades, adding to systems and their complexity, and I don't love the major projects office solution of we'll just stand up a new bureaucracy that goes around the old one, but it does at least hint a bit at the problem of we're spending a lot of time and effort trying to do stuff, but most of that time and effort's navigating our own bureaucracy. I mean, the Vancouver City Council just approved the rezoning for the Olympic Village School nearly 2 decades after that got started. And, there's just a lot of stuff like that where it's less that, we don't have the money, and then we're wasting a lot of time and effort just navigating bureaucracy on a lot of this stuff. And, hardly a uniquely Canadian problem. Apparently New Yorkers are a little shocked that just paying people to show up and shovel snow actually get snow shoveled. Without having to, go through a city union on trying to get that snow cleared off. So it's a general problem, I think, in a lot of developed countries, but one that Canada has not really taken a hard crack at and probably should.
Well, one person frustrated by inefficiencies is BC Premier David Eby, who's looking at the Senate and saying, why are they taking so long, and why are they gutting, which is this Bill C-12? Specifically, he says, we look at the Senate for sober second thought. I have to question whether there's thought and whether there's sobriety in the Senate chamber. He's mad that Bill C-12, the Senate is looking at it and potentially removing the provisions that would allow or that would prevent extortion suspects from claiming refugee status as a way to delay deportation, allegedly.
Which is a fair concern to levy at it. So the article notes that of the 281 people that are being investigated in relation to the wave of extortions, 104 have claimed refugee status, which would largely indicate that it's a case of the system being abused to try and avoid consequences for serious criminality.
The article notes that we don't know how many have been accepted or rejected, though 10 have been deported. The solution for me on all of this stuff is just fund the system better, because the refugee system is notoriously slow and backlogged and could just stand to have people actually read the documents, make a quicker determination, and get on with it. The other side of this is if someone is charged with extortion, even if we don't deport them, we can put them in jail if they get arrested. Like if they are not just charged but convicted. So like there's an element on the other side of let's fund our justice system to actually process investigations and court hearings instead of kind of leaving people in these limbos that doesn't appease anyone.
Yeah, I mean, we should definitely be doing more on the criminal justice side too. But part of the problem is once you get people abusing the refugee system, in order to stay, even throwing additional resources at it, it's still so backed up that each subsequent applicant who is doing it not as a legitimate refugee, but as someone trying to stay in the country longer, that's still, because it is so long, it creates the incentive to then apply for it in order to delay any removal proceedings. All of which means you do kind of have to have a way to clear out that large unnecessary backlog on that, and going through the long process is not necessarily going to get it done as quickly. Of course, maybe there's a way to do like a preliminary hearing very quickly on this and get the out of the way, but the 1 year provision that the bill proposes also seems fairly reasonable. I mean, there's still another process if there is a legitimate fear of safety upon returning to the country. Doesn't entirely foreclose that, but it does mean that people would have to file timely and not use it as a way of avoiding a mandated departure from the country.
I think the thing that's frustrating to me in this comment is that instead of engage with the substance of the debate that the Senate is having over the bill, EB's once again like grandstanding and attacking the institution. And that's become his kind of go-to these days. But like a number of people point out in the article, like given his background as a human rights lawyer and litigant, you think you would expect better, perhaps. Like you could say, oh, he doesn't engage with the argument. Fundamentally, he just says that the bill was perfect and we should have passed it. And it's like, well, clearly they did give it second thought and didn't agree with your thought.
I don't think it has to be perfect to necessarily want a thing that would address the problem quickly to pass rather than being blocked. Like, legislation should be good, but it doesn't have to be perfect. And sometimes getting a problem solved timely is more beneficial than taking years to get to the absolute perfect bit of legislation. Just you can't always come back with future legislation to address whatever gets missed on this one, and maybe there's a spot for that sort of thing, and the Senate isn't necessarily getting the balance right on it.
If he doesn't think the Senate has a role to review legislation, he should just say the Senate shouldn't exist. I could respect that position.
Wouldn't surprise me if
that
he is
the
Democrat.
NDP's position. But one person we're not hearing from enough on immigration issues is the immigration minister herself. Lena Diab is apparently not being seen much by community groups around the country.
Which might have something to do with the fact that she apparently doesn't actually know her file all that well, because whenever she's appeared at committee, she's generally been unable to answer questions, or actually not just even committee, just caucus meetings when the Liberal caucus had questions about the immigration file. There's a lot of falling back on the civil servants that were accompanying her and not showing the usual degree of familiarity one would expect a minister to have with their portfolio, especially because she's been in the job for about a year now? 10 months, something like that?
The best part of this article is that Diab declined Radio Canada's request for an interview and instead sent a statement saying she's met with provincial and territorial counterparts many times in the past 9 months.
Yeah, this notably contrasts to Mark Miller, who any of the past Liberal immigration ministers haven't done a bang-up job on the file, as evidenced by the fact that they oversaw the collapse of the public consensus on immigration through mismanagement. But at least they were regularly meeting with stakeholders. The only one that the CBC journalists were able to track down was that she had a single meeting with a group representing Ukrainians who have fled the war and are seeking a direct path to permanent residency in Canada. That was the only one they found and mentioned in this. Several others did not have their attempts to schedule a meeting be returned.
They also did get 10 Liberal MPs on background saying they don't have confidence in her, which is quite the tell.
Yeah.
So, might be time for a shakeup in
Mark
Carney's cabinet. Maybe he'll get through the round of by-elections that's upcoming. I think we're up to what are we up to? Three, and Alexandre Boulerice of the NDP is apparently mulling jumping to Quebec Solidaire, which would open up probably a pretty contested seat in Quebec, where he's strongly held it for the NDP for a few elections, but I'm sure the Liberals would be eager to get in there. So would the Bloc.
Yeah, Carney really should think of doing a cabinet shuffle. Generally being fairly impressed with him. The cabinet I cannot say the same for. There's quite a few duds in notable positions there that really should be changed out with people who are going to be more competent in their files and know them when they show up to committee, or not tell their constituents that the one of their major initiatives is just a political stunt that they don't expect to actually work, but will cost hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah. Well, speaking of competence in their files, Canada's positioning against India has gotten, I guess, simplified this past week. We went from, India is one of the primary concerns in foreign interference, particularly after the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar here in BC, to, no, it's all fine. We're going on a trade mission, and we're not worried about them anymore, according to one unnamed official. Like, we wouldn't, I think the specific quote was, we wouldn't be going on a trade mission if we had worries about them.
This is one of those cases where I really wish we would actually just name the people who talk. There's a real bad habit that the Ottawa Press bureaus have of just quoting people anonymously when it does not actually need to be anonymous.
Yeah, this feels like it was kind of allowed to go out, because that's how a lot of things aren't like actual leaks. They're like, stories not fed by Mark Carney, but like someone says exactly what we want India to hear as we go to India.
Yeah, I really hate the anonymous sources for everyday statements. That is standard operating procedure in the Canadian media ecosystem. But yeah, the thing is, India was not the only people that heard that, and pretty much everyone in Canada was like, "What? What are you talking about on this? This doesn't seem right." Not after everything we've seen and heard, and it wasn't all that long ago we had a prime minister standing up, laying out some pretty harsh accusations on this particular file, and it is beyond naive to think that would all go away so quickly.
Yeah, people who are upset include Moninder Singh, who's head of the Sikh Federation of Canada, who was told by Vancouver police last Sunday that there are credible threats to his life that he believes are connected to the government of India for his, presumable view that he is a, Khalistani separatist, as they view pretty much all Sikhs in Canada, I think. Other MPs in his own office or in the Liberal caucus were also upset.
Sukh Dhaliwal
is who I was trying to remember.
Yeah, the MP that represents the riding where the previous assassination took place.
So the government, for their part, kind of walked it back a little bit. They had their public safety minister, Gary Anandasagari, come out and say there's a lot of work to do with India, which is the most vague way he could have, I guess, addressed it.
Which, is at least a important thing to be working on and not a political stunt. He was the one I was referring to earlier with the comments to his constituent. But addition to that, Anand said some, vaguely non-committal things about that, they're going to be talking about the issue, obviously, when they meet to discuss security concerns with the Indian government. So, all in all, it's gone from, foot in mouth to vague government boilerplate on things they clearly don't want to really talk about. Which is, not great. And look, at the end of the day, there's a real dilemma Canada is in here, and they are going to have to kind of multi-track the relationship with India because it is just such an important economy and global power that you can't make the relationship entirely about foreign interference and state-sponsored violence in Canada. You can't also not deal with that. And, the grown-up adult way to deal with this that, serious governments do is they acknowledge both and work on balancing that in a responsible way. And I kind of get the sense that's what Carney thinks about this, but you would not know it from what the government overall is trying to communicate. And this really, particularly the anonymous staffer, really feels like a case of government by comm staffer, where everything needs to be reduced to like a simple talking point that has no room for two thoughts that can be in tension with each other.
It's like you just can't do elbows up protecting Canadian sovereignty if you don't protect Canadian sovereignty at any point. Like, trade is important. No one's like, don't trade. But, like, making sure Canadian citizens aren't murdered by foreign countries should be a priority of a government that is worthy of the word sovereign government. And I think Canadians can be mature enough to have that nuanced conversation, like we can have with China, where we say, look, we have our concerns, but we think that it's important to make sure that we can trade our products because it would be mutually beneficial. And there's value to doing that, to reducing tensions between countries. That's the whole theory of the late 20th century, which I guess doesn't exist anymore. It was all wrong, or doesn't work when, a despot gets elected. But you could still try. You could still try to at least have that mature conversation where we don't just like go and deny what we know is happening.
Yeah, and it would also be helpful if the government, as part of this, was doing more on just building up an effective national security apparatus that is better equipped to handle these threats. And so far, there hasn't been a lot of signs of that. Yeah, one thing about the intelligence that came with the as around signature was that a lot of that came from the Americans, because they have the foreign intelligence collection capabilities and we don't. That really should be something that Canada's working a lot harder to develop sovereign capabilities on, as well as modernizing the CSIS Act and how they work, as well as rolling out a foreign agents registry that the government has been slow walking under two separate prime ministers now.
Scott, foreign interference stuff is so 2023. You're acting like there should be some giant report with a list of recommendations that the government could just go step by step.
Yeah, that should, maybe be useful when a potential sovereignty referendum gets supported by a foreign power. Yeah, just throwing that out there.
Well, one person navigating controversies on that side has been Pierre Poilievre, and he decided to try to stake some ground and stand up for Canada only about 12 months too late. But at least he came around to say Canada should remain free.
I mean, that particular bit is not new, but yeah, he's definitely had a problem over the last year of being very clearly uncomfortable talking about the broader issues around Canadian sovereignty, how to deal with the American administration, and a whole bunch of stuff around that. And maybe it's the falling poll numbers that finally convinced him to turn around. Maybe it's realizing finally that the election loss last year might have not gone this way if he'd taken a different tack. But yeah, it came out to this week with a speech trying to basically reset the Conservatives' positioning on all of this. And it was a fairly good speech. I think there was, you can definitely criticize a couple parts here. I think definitely the how optimistic he was about the ability to get a CUSMA renegotiation that is going to be tariff-free. Certainly a thing that can be criticized, but overall decent speech. But the real politically interesting thing here is definitely that it is coming far too late, and it's going to be interesting to see whether or not this new tack can be maintained, because Poilievre's not a person that generally has shown himself to be able to maintain discipline on this stuff and often will kind of revert after a little while.
Yeah, it's quite easy to go to the Economic Club of Canada in Toronto and say tariffs are bad and shouldn't be done, and we need to stand up for Canada in the face of that, and free trade should be our future. Whether he does the same in rural Alberta in a few months or whenever he's next around there, and in other corners, like you say, remains to be seen. I think there's still some interesting things in here where it distinguishes him from the Liberals, right, and the Conservative vision. He kept coming back to the emphasis that America is our second largest customer. America is very important. Things are challenging, but
you can't get around geography.
Yeah, those kind of angles. Whereas Carney, I don't think would deny that, but talks about it less because I don't think his base is very eager to work with Donald Trump right now, and has kind of lost faith in the ability of America to self-correct after they re-elected him.
Yeah, so there are a couple like interesting themes and like laying the groundwork for future criticisms of the Liberals. Definitely doing some stage setting for, Carney's just not getting the job done. It's been a year, nothing's actually happened, which, as a criticism this podcast has made several times. There was discussion of how that, for all the talk of going abroad to secure new trade deals, Canada has trade deals with most developed countries, and that the gains from that are probably not going to be all that high relative to unlocking the ability inside of Canada to get more stuff built here and get it to market quicker. So you're going to see, I think, a little more emphasis on that stuff going forward, presuming you can stick with it. But they've at least are starting to sketch out a critical version of what they can, or a version of what they can be critical of the Liberals' approach that is also still very rah-rah Canada.
But yeah, whether he can keep that focus or if he gets lost on speaking to the audience he's in front of, lost on culture war issues or Bitcoin or whatever the next, digital fad is, we'll see. We do know that the Liberals and Conservatives were eager to get Parliament to work this past week, as well as the Liberals accepted a number of Conservative amendments to the most controversial part of their budget, the little bit buried in there for the regulatory sandbox, as it was been referred to, which was basically the government wanted the ability for ministers to exempt corporations from the laws if they felt like it. The idea being sometimes the law gets in the way of innovation, and screw those laws. In the end, the Conservative amendments require some guardrails to that. So they'll have to consult with Canadians first before providing those exemptions, report back to Parliament, and the approval of such exemptions will require sign-off by a cabinet minister and the president of Treasury Board. And also, we can't exempt corporations from the Conflict of Interest Act and the Access to Information Acts. So an improvement.
Of those, I think the one that's going to be most significant is the having to report or having to consult Canadians first, because that's going to be the thing that will draw eyes on it and make it controversial if it's a bad choice on which one to extend. I mean, president of Treasury Board is already a cabinet minister, so not exactly a tough sell to convince them if the cabinet has signed off on it.
At least it prevents rogue ministers a little bit more, but that's about it.
Maybe, yeah. And I suppose you could get to the situation where if the Treasury Board president was against it, then you would need them, like, if he's one of the people voting against it at cabinet, like, that could potentially scuttle it. And yeah, putting a couple of clear laws where it can't get around also makes sense. The ones that are more, accountability oriented are good. So, yeah, overall, seems like decent amendments on it.
Like, I think the big thing is it lets the Conservatives claim a win. It lets the Liberals get them on side to move the budget ahead. And it did, right? They got the budget to pass on division, so there was no recorded vote, because I guess the Bloc also didn't call for a recorded vote. Elizabeth May wanted to have a standing vote, but CBC notes that only MPs from a recognized party can request one, which also excludes the NDP for now. But yeah, that's a confidence vote come and gone for the Liberals, even as they are technically under a majority right now, as the numbers have gone back and forth. But smooth sailing for a few more weeks or months for Mark Carney as he looks to his by-elections coming up. And that has been Politicoast. Find links to everything we talked about at politicoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicoast. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicoast is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.